I have never seen an affair of this sort handled any better.
The men died wonderfully. There's always that chance that one of them will do something that will leave everyone with a bad taste. This time you couldn't ask for better. Yes?
Yes, Colonel?
You wanted to see me, sir.
Oh, yes. Come in, Colonel. Come in and sit down.
Oh, Colonel Dax, your men died very well.
Blades of Glory, Paths of Glory is a war film that's written and directed by Stanley Kubrick that came out in 1957. So I naturally get really excited when I have any chance to talk about Stanley Kubrick, because for those who don't know already, Stanley Kubrick is my favorite filmmaker of all time, even though I know that he is a morally questionable human being and has done some downright immoral things just to get a scene right. But nevertheless, he is the filmmaker that truly opened my eyes to the beauty of the art of filmmaking and really inspired me to want to become an artful filmmaker myself. So with that being said, obviously I had huge expectations going into this film, even though I know it's one of his more earlier works. 1957 is really edging close to the time period where people really started recognizing Kubrick as a cinematic genius. And even though Stanley Kubrick is my favorite filmmaker, you know that I really try to keep it real and be honest with you. I try to look at it in the most honest way that I can and not let my fanboyism really get in the way of really assessing this film in a more objective way. And now after that I've seen it, I can definitely say that this is an amazing film, and I'm really happy that I watched it. I understand that that's really a surprise to nobody, but I still think that this film is really deserving of all the praise that it's got, because this film basically does everything that you would expect a great Kubrick film to do, which is basically have stunning cinematography, have excellent writing, which is something that I'll dive into in a little bit, but also just spectacular direction from start to finish, because there's not a single bland scene in this film. Even normal scenes where people are just talking, it never comes off as flat, it never comes off as lazy. Everything seems incredibly purposeful. And even in the first 10 minutes of this film, I was thinking, okay, I can see why some people would find the beginning of this film boring. But to me, there was still a lot of direction going on with how the characters were moving as they were talking, and just their overall body gestures as they were having these really morally questionable conversations about war. And it's things like that that really make this film engaging as you watch it throughout the film. And the thing about this film that I truly love, though, is the fact that it really raises controversial questions about the corrupt nature of power and the military and war in general. Because this film really dives in to how people that are in positions of power, especially if you're a general or even those that are even higher than a general, can really look at human lives as these kind of mathematical probabilities and strategies, and they don't really value life in the way that most human beings ought to. And it just goes to show you that people in power, they can sometimes look at human lives like they're playing a game of Battleship, or they're playing like a smart game of chess or something like that. And anybody looking at that from the outside can easily say, oh wow, that's incredibly immoral, and human life should not be treated like that. And they would be right for thinking that way. But other than that, one thing about this film that really caught me off guard was the dialogue. Because one thing that I really love about Stanley Kubrick films in general is the fact that they don't really rely on a lot of dialogue, and he is just a master at visual storytelling. And he can convey so many thought-provoking themes and convey story elements and character traits just through visual means, whether it's through the sound design, through the camera work, through even the color palette of a scene. He's a really aesthetically emotional film director. This film, I think, actually had, don't get me wrong, this is also a visually stunning film in terms of all the aesthetics, the sound, the score, and the camera work. But this was a much more dialogue-driven film that I really expected. And it's a film that, again, unlike most Kubrick films, had really impressive dialogue throughout the film and relies heavily on these kinds of conversations that you just don't see in a lot of Kubrick films. And it kind of makes me incredibly jealous because, you know, as someone who is trying to be a filmmaker, I still haven't dabbled that much in writing, and I've always respected and appreciated the filmmakers that can really tell a lot through just visuals and aesthetic work. And this film showed me that Kubrick can also do an excellent job at just having a dialogue-driven film as well. And I truly, truly admire this film for that. But one thing I will say about the dialogue that kind of bothered me just a little bit when I was watching it was the fact that I felt like the way that the characters were talking to each other and the way they would go back and forth in between conversation was just a bit too quick. Like, there wasn't like any pause in between. It was kind of like all the actors were just ready to give their lines all the time. And that was one thing that kind of threw me off as I was watching it because it felt a little bit unnatural. And maybe if, I'm not sure if it was completely intentional or not, but maybe if there was just some sort of, you know, pause or a bit of a slower pace when it comes to the dialogue, I think that it would be a much more immersive for me to really get into it. But it's not something that really took me that out of the film. It's just something that I thought was noticeable, especially when the film began. I was like, whoa, these people are talking to each other incredibly fast. But even though this film is, I guess I would say, simplistic, I would say that it's also incredibly ambitious in the sense that it tackles a lot of controversial themes about war and about the corrupt nature of those who are in power when it comes to controlling war. And I think that this film is really bold to do something like that because I heard that this film was banned in France for like almost 20 years. And it kind of makes sense given the kind of content that this film dives into when it comes to the French military. But, you know, I think this film isn't making a statement about just the French military. I think the French military is just serving as a foundational piece to make a broader statement about the military in general and war in general. Like all Stanley Kubrick films, it's incredibly bold, it's ambitious, and it does a really good job at reaching a lot of people without coming off like too artsy-fartsy. And even though I love really artistically bold movies, really artistically ambitious films, one thing that I love about Stanley Kubrick as a film director is that, or I guess I should say filmmaker, is that he is really good at reaching large audiences of people without really compromising his own artistic integrity. But yeah, there is a lot to love about this film. The aesthetics are on point, the camera work, the sound design, the score, all used in incredibly immersive ways throughout the film. And again, the dialogue and the writing is also top notch as well. The only thing that I really had a problem with is maybe the pace of the dialogue. I thought it was a little bit too quick for my liking. But other than that, this film gives you a lot to chew on. It's thought-provoking. It's rather emotional as well. And it's funny because The Deer Hunter, it was a lot longer of a film. Like, it's double the length of this film. And I felt like I got a lot more out of this film than I did with The Deer Hunter. And it's funny because both of those films also end with, like, a song. And I felt like the way that Paths of Glory used music and song was much more effective, and I felt like it was a lot more earned, and it just felt like there was a lot more there to really dive into than what I personally got out of The Deer Hunter. But, you know, that's just my personal opinion. Either way, I think that this is an absolutely stunning film. I really enjoyed it. I think it's on Criterion Collection, so one of these days I'm going to snag that. But I obviously highly recommend everybody to watch this film, especially if you really like war films. I think that you would get a lot out of this. But just do be warned that this film, like the actual sequences of war in this film, are kind of minimal. There's only maybe about 25 minutes of war in this film, 25, 30 minutes. That's being kind of generous. But all the other aspects of this film that don't actually have war sequences are incredibly thought-provoking and just have a lot to say about power in the military and corruption in general. So I'm going to give Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory a 9 out of 10. So yeah, if you haven't seen this film, I highly recommend it. This was a long time coming for me because, as I said, Stanley Kubrick is my favorite filmmaker of all time, and I've heard about this movie for years. I just never took the time to watch it. I guess the fact that it was on the older side kind of made me less enthusiastic to watch it, but I was totally wrong for that because this film delivered in a lot of different ways, and I highly recommend everybody to check it out. So those are my thoughts on Paths of Glory. Don't forget to make your film requests in the comment section and also give me your thoughts on the film as well. And if you really liked what I had to say about the film, please give this video a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.